Hello and welcome to Asset Dedication's tutorial on implementing dedicated portfolios, the financial plan. In this video, we'll cover the first of the 4 foundational components of Asset Dedication's investment strategy, the financial plan. This plan pertains to your lifetime financial goals when designing your overall growth portfolio. In the next 3 videos of the series, we'll cover the other 3 foundations, which are the income portfolio, which relates to bonds, the growth portfolio, stocks, and the critical path for monitoring the portfolio's performance over time. Before we start, all of our financial analyses and strategies are compliant with the Certified Financial Planning Board, or CFP Board, which is the official organization that sets the highest standards for financial planning. In a nutshell, the CFP Board defines 7 crucial steps for a healthy and proper planning process. First, we must take into account the circumstances underlying the family's personal and/or financial situation, as well as, number 2, the goals that the family wants to achieve. Number 3, we must analyze the current course of action and design potential recommendations. Number 4, based on our findings, we develop the financial planning recommendations, so we can, number 5, present the recommendations to the client and refine them as needed before, number 6, implementing the recommendations, and finally, number 7, monitoring them over time. Now on to the financial plan itself. Asset Dedication's financial plan is designed to cover the big picture. That is, to build a framework of a person or family's lifetime financial goals, then convert these very goals into estimates of required cash flows. The cash flows become the target of the investment strategy, which itself is designed to maximize the probability of achieving every goal in the financial plan. In the field of financial investing, 2 major theories prevail. One is the modern portfolio theory, designed by Nobel laureate Harry Markowitz in 1952. And the oldest general theory of investing that's still in wide use today. The second is the dedicated portfolio theory, developed by Lawrence Fisher in 1971, and the theory followed by Asset Dedication in our clients' financial plans. Let's explain now why that is. The modern portfolio theory focuses on overall asset allocation and the trade-off between returns versus volatility, the day-to-day random fluctuations that occur in the stock market and in all financial markets. It treats volatility as risk and does not factor in how the portfolio is supposed to be used or what goals it's going to be used for. It generally comes up with an overall allocation scheme, which is specified as X% in stocks and Y% in bonds, like 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds, just as a quick example. It treats both bonds and bond funds as if they were essentially the same, which isn't true. Still, this is part of the very fundamentals of the modern portfolio theory. Because we believe these tenets have become antiquated, and all the more so in the 21st century, Asset Dedication instead bases itself on dedicated portfolio theory. This theory focuses your income portfolio on the holding of individual bonds, which are targeted to meet the yearly cash flows over a specific time horizon, all as laid out in the financial plan. It is this time horizon, typically ranging from 5 to 10 years, that determines the allocation of your capital to the bonds. As a rule of thumb, the longer the horizon, the greater the allocation to bonds, with each year requiring from 4 to 5% on average of the overall portfolio. So a 5-year time horizon will result in somewhere between 20 and 25%, whereas a 10-year portfolio would result in somewhere between a 40 and 50% allocation to bonds. To help you visualize our strategy, let's suppose the following example. Our client has a desired cash flow of $40,000. Right from the first year, they're going to be withdrawing money out of the portfolio. This, of course, in addition to any other money they had from Social Security or any other source of income. Also, because they want to protect themselves from a moderate to high inflation rate, let's assume an inflation protection of 3% per year. The time horizon for this particular analysis is 8 years. That's a choice of the individual client, of course, in consultation with their financial advisor. What will happen here is a series of cash flows over an 8-year span of time. The plan here is to buy 8 bonds. The first one maturing in year 1, the next one maturing in year 2, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the 8th bond, which will be maturing to coincide that cash flow needed in year number 8. It's all going to ultimately amount to a little over $355,000 by year 8. Here's what that income portfolio would generate in terms of its cash flows. Its last bond here, in year 8, would generate a cash flow of $49,195. That's throwing off interest for that entire 8-year span of time naturally. Following this logic, you'd buy bonds that would mature in earlier years, factoring in the market you would receive from bonds maturing in later years. The point is that you must make sure to have a cash flow in any given year that matches what your needs are, going all the way back to year 1. This continues every year for the lifetime of the financial plan and the growth portfolio, replenishing the income portfolio as needed as each year passes. And that's it. Whatever is not needed for the bonds is invested in the growth portfolio, consisting primarily of stocks, usually in mutual funds. Because stocks on average grow faster than bonds, the growth portfolio is designed to continually replenish the income portfolio, maintaining the client's cash flows over a lifetime. Now, the lifetime for a family or individual changes depending on the perspective you take. Usually, when people think of the cycle of life, they take the human, common sense perspective of birth, growth, maturity, and death, starting off as children, growing into teenagers, maturing into adulthood, and then aging until the moment of passing, after which the next generation of children start the cycle anew. From a financial perspective, however, this cycle takes on a slightly different meaning. Here, the childhood and teenage years, as well as young adult years of an individual, are treated as the training or education phase of this individual. This is the stage that's lasting roughly through the first 20 to 30 years of a person's life, where the individual acquires the skills necessary to compete in the market and start generating income. This is followed by what we call the accumulation phase, which is when an individual enters the market and generates the bulk of their lifetime incomes. This lasts roughly for the next 30 to 40 years of a person's life, which are usually their most productive years from an income generation point of view. Next comes the distribution phase, which is when an individual is ready to retire and therefore begins withdrawing from their savings in order to enjoy the final 10 to 30 years of their life without even a fraction of the labor required during the accumulation phase. This is followed by the last stage in a person's life, which is simply, death. This is referred to as the transfer phase, as the remaining savings from a client's life is passed on as a legacy to their next generation, which starts the cycle anew, all the way back to the training and education phase. A lifetime financial plan usually covers the last 3 stages in a person's life, from accumulation, saving for retirement, through distribution, withdrawing during retirement, and finally to transfer, which involves estate planning and generational wealth transfer. This is how the critical path of your lifetime portfolio can be visualized. On the horizontal axis, we have the age of an individual from birth to eventual death. On the vertical axis, we have their total portfolio value, which is all the capital they've accumulated across the years. After the education phase, the individual enters the market. The critical path transitions into the accumulation phase with 401k or other types of retirement accounts. It is sometime during this phase where the financial plan should be considered and developed. This is where, at least at first, most if not all of the client's income will be coming from their paychecks. As we near their late 30s or early 60s, we enter a transitional phase called pre-retirement, which is when both the client and their financial advisors begin the preparations for the retirement. At this stage, the client is also expected to have other forms of income aside from their paychecks, usually in the form of investments that comprise our growth portfolios. Crossing this black dotted line, we enter the distribution phase, which is the retirement per se. This is where we first see a flatlining of the portfolio, meaning that the client no longer accumulates capital, but instead spends it on their retirement in the form of portfolio withdrawals to replace their paycheck. After the flat line, we see a decline in the portfolio value. That's because the portfolio itself is spending down. Ultimately, sometime during this phase, it will be changing hands from the current client to their next generation, meaning that upon their passing, the effective value for the client's portfolio will end up being zero. And that's the basics of your asset dedication financial plan. Before we end the video, here are a few notes on how we integrate our clients' plans and portfolios for their lifetime earnings and investments. First, we start with a financial plan to estimate the cash flows needed to meet all of the client's goals. We dedicate the income portfolio to match the cash flows, and the growth portfolio to replenish the income portfolio. To tie it all up, we monitor and adjust the plan as circumstances change, all based on our critical path evaluations. These are precisely the steps that we'll tackle in our next videos. Follow us for updates on our tutorials and start your financial plan now with asset dedication.